All right, it's time for a field report. And with that comes the intrepid director that we all know and love, the man behind such epics as FUBAR, The Witcher, Umbrella Academy, Daredevil,
Oh my
one of
God.
the aces with Marvel Television, Mr. Steve Surjik. Buddy, good to see you. You've been missed.
It's great to see you too. It's been a long time, and I'm delighted to be here.
Likewise,
And, and
I want to point out before you go down the rabbit hole on it, because you're going to want to ditch this part of it. You, meaning Steve Surjik's going to want to not to mention this, but he is one of the heroes who's helped us with our combat radio Christmas Carol for a cure the last couple of years for the children battling
oh,
NMOSD in the hospital. And behind him is a signed guitar signed by the Temptations, which was also part of the cause. And every once in a while, he takes it down and makes music. So he claims.
I didn't say music. I said it takes time to make noise,
Noise,
and you
noise.
can see it right up here,
Yeah,
right over my right shoulder there. But yeah, it's signed by the Temptations, and it makes a beautiful sound. Beautiful
it
sound.
does. Especially when you're playing it, my friend. Some good shots of us on the red carpet from that night, but I'll save those for later. It's good to see you. And with you comes the dynamite dynamo package of film awesomeness. And you suggested something out of the dark ages of, I think, the 1980s. A David Lynch masterpiece, some would say, Blue Velvet.
She wore blue velvet, bluer than velvet was the night, softer than satin was the light from the stars. She wore blue velvet, bluer than velvet were her eyes, warmer than May her tender sighs. Love was ours, love I held tightly, feeling the rapture grow, like flames burning brightly. But when she left, gone was the glow of blue velvet. But in my heart still always be.
That Blue Velvet was he followed up. I think he came on the scene with Eraserhead. That was his graduation film, and
Mm-hmm.
Eraserhead was black and white. And I don't know many people that really attached themselves to that film, with the exception of myself. I was passionate about it. I even in Canada back in the day, I even put it on tour a little bit and had my own short film in front of it and showed it to different municipalities and towns. And
Smart.
I would often get people coming to the front ticket booth to say that they wanted their money back, which didn't bother me because I just assumed that they were Philistines and didn't understand the great work of Mr. Lynch. Anyway, he followed up Blue Velvet with no. Oh yes, Blue Velvet came after that. I guess the question is, when did Dune come? When did he do Dune? It's after Blue Velvet. Yeah,
Yeah,
is that
no,
right?
Dune was prior, right? And being based over at NBC Universal, where the De Laurentiis group has been based, they were trying to get him in there to do a Dune director's cut for decades, and he would just never entertain the idea. But it's interesting because this is the same finance group behind Dune that gave him the money for this. So I don't know if that was like a patch job apology for the way things went or what.
He was quite bitter about the editorial process on Dune.
Yeah,
Yes, yeah, yeah. He's been quoted as saying some nasty things about that experience. So I'm sure that it had something to do with that. But and after you do, after you came back into Blue Velvet, it was considered so important by so many people. I'm sure that the people at De Laurentiis want to get back on board with David Lynch.
of course. I mean,
Why not?
one of my daughter's like master scenarios that she sometimes creates is imagine walking into Bob's Big Boy, which was David Lynch's headquarters, by the way.
Yep.
If you went in there 2 or 3 days between lunch and dinner, you were guaranteed to see him at least once. with the same meal, right? French fries and a malt or something. But my daughter says, imagine going into Bob's Big Boy and in a booth, you get to join David Lynch, but opposite David Lynch on the other side of the booth is David Byrne and Steve Surjik. Imagine that conversation. Because they're all three like super charismatic, cerebral talkers, like David Lynch, David Byrne of Talking Heads, and then Steve Surjik from Marvel Television. She said that would be like a cyclone of like mind bending conversational awesomeness. And she's right about that. But you would have to explain to me, as a fan
Can't
of
believe you
Lynch,
put me in that group. But anyway, God bless the God. You know,
hey, she knows greatness when when she can detect greatness when she's in a room with it. But this movie like starts off as like a very kind of like Leave It to Beaver-esque kind of vibe and gets dark pretty quick. But I'm going to leave it to the director to
no, I'm
explain.
not
I
gonna,
mean,
I'm not going to explain anything about the movie, but I think you got it right. It starts as a like a blue sky. Everything is
yeah,
pretty. The neighborhood is perfect, and then you kind of go past that white picket fence. There's a guy there that's watering the lawn, and the hose has a kink in it, an allegory for something. I'm not sure what. Probably his heart valve, and he
yeah.
falls on the ground. He starts to cough. The camera goes into the dirt, and you start to see beetles underneath in the grass eating, decaying things, and that's kind of a great metaphor for the rest of the movie. It's on the front there's the surface that is incredibly beautiful and pristine, and everything seems right. And you go in, you just scratch the surface, you go back a little further, and you see something else that's really disturbing, and you see what's running it, and that's really what the film is about. And then
Yeah.
everything else is just I would say is just a version of that, or a they're just various combinations of narrative that follow that format. Mm.
Do you think a lot of what people say Lynch implies in his work he actually meant to imply, or do you think it's a mix of some implication by him and just happy accidents that the audience sometimes interprets as genius? What do you
Well,
think it is?
he definitely. I think that all. I think in all of the arts, I think there's definitely there's an intention that the artist has, and then
Yeah.
there is the observer obviously sees something that's unique. It's their own personal experience, and the difference between the two is huge often. And if the filmmaker, the storyteller, the artist is clever, whoa, they will let that play, and because they're not trying to, the audience will lean into the meaning that they interpret, and that's great. It's called a successful show, successful movie. And the more people that interpret it different ways, the greater it becomes, because
Right.
it's a personal experience for every person, and yet they're all experiencing it in a different way.
Well, the
Um,
audience can sometimes see gospel that isn't there, and then can sometimes misinterpret or miss gospel that is there. And isn't it appropriate that we hear a horn blaring through us trying to analyze David Lynch in Steve Surjik's production office here? That is so Lynchian. It's like
Hilarious.
that was like a cue from heaven where he'd be like,
That's a
censor these
garbage truck.
guys.
That's the bin truck
Garbage
picking up
truck.
the garbage.
A garbage truck. Um,
Yeah,
you know,
so David Lynch would never, I never heard him really discuss the meaning of anything in his work so much. A little bit about character, a little bit about his process, but not so much about what it means. But he was always very careful to avoid that kind of his own personal interpretation, I
yeah.
think.
Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, excuse me. It all feels like heartfelt and well intended in terms of its sort of film constructive ethics or film construction ethics, so to speak. But it's like, and I love the setup. I always like the sort of homegrown, small in scope but big in ramification type murder mysteries where
Right.
amateurs decide, it's like the internet. Amateurs decide they can figure something out. So he takes on, basically he discovers
Oh
an
yeah.
ear in a field.
Right. That's right. That's right.
And
Just walking along in a beautiful day. Again,
yeah,
beautiful day. Everything's picture perfect. There's beautiful music, and he notices something on the ground. It's an ear.
Yeah.
Now that's another one of those everything is right. Then you go a little further into the picture and you find out something horrific. Anyway, continue on.
Yeah,
It
and
turns out
he
the ear belongs to someone. He takes it to his dad, doesn't he? No, his girlfriend's dad.
yeah, he's got a thing for one of the girls at the high school. Her father's a detective. He's already on the case, but first thing out of the box that I have to question is him picking this ear up and putting it in a bag. But that's very Lynch. You know,
That's it. Yeah.
Lynch doesn't have any of those barriers. I'd be like, let's
You've
call
never found
forensics.
any. You've
No,
never
I
found any
haven't.
in the parking lot.
Not yet. I do have a story about a dead body though at a park and ride. I'll share with you. And
Yeah.
that's a story for another day. But no ear. So that kind of unravels things. The Laura Dern plays the detective's daughter, who somehow connects it back to this singer, who's Isabella Rossellini, who I understand got dropped immediately after the release of this movie by her agents. But I'm sure she's been picked up since.
Yeah. Yeah. She did
Um,
okay.
yeah, she's done all
In
right.
fact, I don't know if you noticed, but in the Academy Awards, she was wearing blue velvet around her body.
Was she? Yeah, because
Mhm.
she's in Conclave,
Yeah. And she was
which I thought
nominated for
was
that, or
yeah,
she was part of that team. And
yeah,
she came on wearing blue velvet, just like a shawl, blue velvet
yeah.
shawl. Yeah, there you go.
In
So
honor of
she's still
David.
thinking about it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, in honor of David's recent passing, I'm sure. So that kind of gets us going to all the things you love in a movie, which is a mystery unfolding, people doing reckless things you would never do, but you're on the edge of your seat watching them do it. Like, I'm going to disguise myself as a fumigator, go in and I'm going to swipe a key to the apartment and hide in the closet.
And that's what he does. And it is very, what was the example you used of was it the early kind of the early detective shows where you have a kid in high school that just starts trying to figure out the crime. I'm sorry, I can't get my ability to speak this morning.
Well, I used to leave it the Beaver reference or an Ozzie and Harriet kind of reference to sort of illustrate the landscape, but it feels like kind of like an early Dragnet where Tommy, what'd I tell you about sneaking into people's houses and hiding in ladies' closets?
Yeah,
I hope
yeah.
you learned your
Those
lesson,
are
Tommy, about
those are the
breaking and
Hardy
entering.
brothers. And they had
Yeah,
a whole
yeah,
bunch of books when I was
yeah,
growing up, and they're real like teenage mysteries, and that's the way this feels
yeah.
at the beginning. You're absolutely right. He once his girlfriend's father, who's a detective or a police officer, tells him, don't tell anyone. You're into a ride. It's going to be a great experiment moving forward. And you're
Those,
right. The first thing he does is he disguises himself as a fumigator. Again, part of the theme of the piece are these insects that are in the subterranean world that are eating away behind the scenes. And he goes in to fumigate those bugs, hides in a closet, and sees things that no teenager should see, I guess.
there's two things that whenever I hear from anyone, not just in movies, that make me immediate. It equals an immediate red flag is don't tell anyone about this, and who else knows about this? As soon as someone asks me, I say, well, I've got packages of this ready to go to all the major news publications. So we're ready to go, just in case you're the guy who's going to wax me going
Right.
out the door. It's such a
That's funny.
nerve-wracking
Who
thing to
else
hear.
knows about this? That's right. That's
Yeah.
always you try to make the list long,
Yeah. Who have you
about 100
told about
people
this?
that are
Yeah. This has a great cast. Dennis Hopper shows up playing what I believe is a version of himself, Dennis Hopper, on a Saturday night. Gas masked. I mean, that's a great touch, I have to say. I'm not sure if that's probably a Lynchian touch.
the two of them. I read an interview about where they discussed that gas mask. It was in the script, but it wasn't being used properly. I guess David Lynch didn't really have the right.
Right.
But the actor knew exactly how that should work. With he kind of really brought it to the scene. Like he really brought the crazy to that scene because
Yeah.
it wasn't obviously he's such a great contributor to that movie. He
Well,
really
an actor will find it. An actor will find it for you sometimes.
yeah.
Or at least give you options. And I remember that's a lesson that goes back to the very early days. But I think I heard it from Coppola in Milius's office, where one of the reasons he loved working with European actors, particularly on The Godfather, they would come to him with 5 or 6 ideas and just test fire all of them, and he'd pick the one he wanted from them. They would come prepared with all these options, and it feels like with the gas mask, that may have been what happened here, or Hopper, being an old school guy going back to Rebel Without a Cause and what Gilligan's Island or whatever the fuck. He comes from a school too of give it to me and I'll process it and give you some things to decide. But one of the things that's clear about this cast, which is a good one, and a lot of them are from Dune, is they must have loved working with Lynch, and I think Lynch gave them license to kind of do that. Dean Stockwell, I mean,
Yeah.
Dean Stockwell's
Yeah.
performance is brilliant, and there's like a whole Dune crew from this. Brad Dourif shows up, Jack Nance, who drank himself to death, regrettably. Eraserhead, Surjik's all-time favorite movie.
By the way, the lineup of the movies was Eraserhead, and then well, Elephant Man was in 1980, so it was before Blue Velvet.
Yeah,
Blue Velvet was until 1986. So
right.
I guess Elephant Man was way before that. Yeah. And Elephant Man made a lot of sense after Eraserhead. The same kind of vibe.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was all, deformed person, trying to be recognized as a human being. It was perfect for him. It was the perfect coming out movie for him to do. He
Right.
was good at it, and it was, even though it was highly unusual, it was relatable. Whereas Elephant Man was, excuse me, Elephant Man was, Eraserhead was just so abstract that people had trouble relating to it.
Yeah,
Eraserhead was like a midnight movie. I've gone off the track here a little bit.
No, but you mentioned Elephant Man, which was a brilliant film. I can only see it once. And Merrick was in real life very inspirational. I mean, that guy was very different than you would probably interpret him to be. And he died sort of as a semi-celebrity.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he took a door to. He was born normal, and then around age 4, 5, and 6, he started to change. But he attended school like everyone else. You know how hard that could be. Kids being the punks that they are at times. He took on jobs as door-to-door salesman, but when he found himself in sort of the carnival circuit, so to speak, he thrived in it because he said, "Look, I'm your prime attraction." Like he was like he had a Barnum angle, but he went on being a very, very interesting human being. But I can't. The Elephant Man's a little too heartbreaking for me.
I didn't know he was a door-to-door salesman. That actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
because
he had a tremendous amount of guts for some. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you.
No, please do. I mean, that's fascinating because it probably gave him the ability to relate, to make himself relatable, later in life when he became much more well known, I guess.
Yeah. And it seems like he's that character. Merrick has shown up in other projects since in different ways. Lynch was probably the perfect director at the perfect time to make that movie, but that, of course, I think and that's produced by Mel Brooks, right?
Isn't that bizarre? That's the craziest thing ever.
If I remember right.
It's absolutely right, and it's really unusual because for those that don't know, Mel Brooks is known for really broad comedy. This is probably the opposite of that. This is the most sort of, I would say, serious, empathetic, heartstrung movie that you could make. Anyway, it is not what you would think is something that he would produce.
Right.
Wow.
But Lynch shows his vision, and it certainly had matured by the time he did this. I mean, Blue Velvet is a beautiful movie to look at.
Blue Velvet is a masterpiece to look at. And we should remember that David Lynch was a art school grad who did a lot of painting and a lot of drawings, and he, in fact, he continued to do that. He had art openings, and he had a lot of sculptures that he'd done. He was really obsessed with eggs, but yeah, that's it definitely demonstrates his insights into two-dimensional, three-dimensional art. He's really good at it.
Now, this movie tries to put a bow on the situation at the end, I think. The Isabella Rossellini. All right, sorry. Spoilers if you haven't seen a movie that's almost 40 years old. But there's like a kidnapping at the core of this to like basically put Rossellini into sort of a indentured servitude situation or worse. But her kid is returned to her at the end of the movie, even though I think her husband is
Well, her
killed.
husband was, yeah, the husband, that's where the ear came from in the
Yeah,
original scene. That was off of his body when he was, I guess, when he was alive.
yeah.
Yeah, but he was gone. He didn't make it, her husband. But she got her daughter, she got her child back, it was a sense of, I had an incredible sense of relief at the end of that movie with music and love, and everything was beautiful. And
Yeah.
it's unusual because really, when you think about it, as you say, you do the analysis on it. She was missing a husband who had been chopped up. Her life had been, run by gangsters for the last, I don't know how many years. And there was death and mayhem everywhere around her. So, yeah, very unusual. My agent was actually in that movie. My agent was once my agent. I have new agents, but it was when I was at CIA. There's a guy in the movie that's on top of the car, and he's a football player, and he's like, and he's been sort of hot for Kyle's girlfriend.
Yeah.
And anyway, he's like getting really angry at her and stuff, and she's naked with her top off, and he's like yelling at her and stuff. Anyway, that was my agent still though. He was like the perfect looking guy for that job. He was as a young actor. I was like watching the movie and I went, wow, that's
Isn't
Kenny.
that is funny when that happens, right? Former agents, managers, other industry types who like had a crack or a moment on a film somewhere. It comes up every once in a while. It's always fun to somebody I know who was at ICM was in The Outsiders. So it's fun. We just had that conversation not too long ago. My wife has a hilarious story about dealing with Dennis Hopper at Warner Brothers about Easy Rider, an Easy Rider like recut or something. I'll let her tell the story at some point, but Hopper was a character, and Hopper's great in this because Hopper is menacing.
Are you lied to me? You sure?
Hey!
Hello, baby.
Who is this fuck?
A friend. He's from the neighborhood. We were just talking.
Oh. You're from the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Your neighbor. Well, what's your name, neighbor?
Jeffrey. He's a good kid, Frank.
Shut the fuck up. Hey, you want to go for a ride?
No, thanks.
No, thanks. What does that mean?
I don't want to go.
Go where?
For a ride.
A ride. Hell, that's a good idea. Okay, let's go. Let's go. Get your fucking robe. Raymond? Come on, we're gonna go for a joyride.
To his credit, I know he gets a lot of guff. I do think that guy can act, and he plays these parts really well of like the I don't want any trouble. Like the very
He plays
innocent
an innocent guy, and it's really you have to imagine that that's probably David Lynch. That's our way into the movie as an audience, and it's probably that he probably represents David Lynch, Cobb McLaughlin,
Yeah,
and
he
similarly in Twin Peaks, I went back and I watched a few episodes of Twin Peaks, including the pilot, where he plays a detective that comes into the small town to solve the case of the murder, the serial killer. And again, he's this very earnest guy who cares profoundly about the people around him in the neighborhood, and he loves nature, and he loves a hamburger with mustard and ketchup and a root beer. You know what I mean? He's like all American in every way, and that's him. And yet he's obsessed in real life. What's he doing in the FBI's homicide division? He's obviously has an obsession with the darker side.
What would you say as a director? What would you say it is about Twin Peaks? How would you sort of stitch that back together for someone who's contemplating going down the rabbit hole on it?
Well, I think it's actually very similar to Blue Velvet. I think that it's, the Hardy Boys meets, I don't know, Hieronymus Bosch or something. I mean, it's a real combination of two extremes.
Yeah.
A world that is this perfect little universe, this perfect little community that is infiltrated by some heinous crime, and along comes the David Lynch character, Colin McLaughlin, who is going to solve the problem and get to the bottom of it. Now, what happens though in Twin Peaks is when you're expecting, all these clues come to the fore. Every episode, there's some very concrete clues about what's going on and who's guilty and who's not guilty. Right. And unfortunately, or fortunately, but it's definitely what makes it Twin Peaks, is it just continues to go off into chaos. It never return. You never ever solve the problem. I don't know how many seasons you watched, but the problem was never solved.
You put me on it earlier this week for like maybe the second attempt. Maybe 15 years ago, I started watching this, and I will say it's well done, and I do love the cast, and that does a lot of speaking for me, or it does a lot of speaking to me in situations like this. If I love watching the actors work, then I'll stick with something. But I haven't gotten to the part where the mysticism has kicked in yet. But again, like Eraserhead, your favorite movie. I mean, Steve Surjik's favorite movies are like Eraserhead, and then somewhere down here is like Lawrence of Arabia and Jaws. No, I'm kidding, of course. But you have a very good understanding or interpretation of what Lynch is signaling in his work, including Eraserhead and Twin Peaks. And I'm sometimes, I don't know, I guess I'm kind of like, I'll confess I'm baffled by it at times.
Well, and and that's and I think that's just fine. And I don't think I would be too. They on the Wikipedia page, they refer to him as potentially the greatest visionary artist of all time. His acclaimed film often distinguishes surreal experimental qualities, numerous accolades. But at the end of the day, everyone has their personal experience with David Lynch, and right. It's either one that they get to or they don't. And it's not
right. So for someone, he is all that, and that's fantastic. Yeah. And I mean, I do like to watch movies without any expectations, and to watch them sort of unfold as a visual medium. I don't want to over talk it because I'm a simple person at heart. But it's not like watching.
But there's a simple line in his movies and his TV. There's a simple line which is there was a crime and they're going to resolve the crime. And we go down the rabbit hole following the clues. That's really the simplest. And that was in Blue Velvet. That was the same way. Now, you maybe didn't buy into that, maybe you weren't tricked into the rabbit hole the same as some, but that's kind of what makes it it's special. Like as an example, one of his produced one of the guys that produced this Blue Velvet I think he's the third one on the list. But anyway, he came to my film school when I was in Montreal, and he was talking about the movie, and a bunch of us in the class had a bet, and that was at the time all of these the opening weekends weren't published in every magazine in the world, so we were betting how much it made, because it was such an influential movie, Blue Velvet, and we had a big bet going. Half the class thought this, half the class thought that. My thought was that it made over $50 million. Everyone, the other half of the class was that it didn't do very well. He was like, as a producer, he was like, does it really matter how it did? No, it did not make $50 million. It did not make $50 million. And it's like, it made so much noise, so many people were aware of it. You would think that it was a major financial event. It wasn't, it was an art event,
So I had heard that this holds some kind of record, and I don't know that there are such records on these things that, like, in terms of, you know, refund demands. But maybe that is exactly what Lynch's intentions were. Maybe the conversation about people demanding a refund due to shock was part of like the built-in marketing angle subliminally in his approach. You know what I saw actually is I saw Siskel and Ebert.
Oh yeah, yeah. Just don't go on. That's good. Did you demand your money back on that one? Did you?
No, I didn't see it in theaters, so I saw it on HBO first time around when I was a kid. So it was I did not ask for my subscription rate back, but I saw Siskel and Ebert talking about this, and I remember as kids not really agreeing with them on anything. But I do, when I watch them now, feel like they make the occasional smart point on some things. And this came up, and they were divided on it. Ebert thought it was shocking. Siskel loved it. We've since lost both guys. But, you know, Siskel seemed to like it because he was shocked by it unexpectedly, you know, and Ebert was like, this is appalling. Like they basically mirrored the audience, I think, in not sort of a critic sense, but in a human sense. Like Ebert was like, she's brutalized and there's no point to it. And why is she doing this? And she's totally disrespected in this film. And Siskel loved all of that, I think, because, you know, when he buckled his seatbelt in the theater, metaphorically, of course, he didn't know what he was going to get. And he got this. So and I think he kind of liked the experience of like, whoa. And I think a lot of people do.
And I don't think that it's, there are some filmmakers out there, some films I've seen that I would not recommend. But I think that there's enough in a David Lynch, generally speaking, in a David Lynch show, like whether it's Twin Peaks, Blue Velvet, or one of those, that you can follow the A story and that it's actually compelling. I think that is real. Now, it isn't always. Like in Elephant Man, I would say, yeah, it's very compelling. But in his, in his student film, Eraserhead, maybe not so compelling, but his midstream stuff, Blue Velvet, Twin Peaks, very compelling. And I think a regular audience would probably like it. And I would recommend it highly. If we were doing, the review, I'd have one thumb up, you'd have one thumb down. So
no, well, you're maybe right. I don't know if I'm officially a thumbs down. What I would say is the same thing I say about every movie. People should see it and get their own interpretation of it. I'm like, I'm a big advocate of like, this may be the thing for you. I don't get it, but shit, dude, I don't understand a lot of what's out there. But it's fun to talk about, and it's also, I love the fact that he expresses himself in what seems to be like a candid filmmaking sense. I had a friend who worked with him, and he was on a scene, and low budget movie, one of those things where David Lynch like used a piece of pizza on a shirt underneath to look like a bullet hole wound. They were doing this scene, and there was something interesting about it. And he asked him, he goes, David, what is this scene about? And Lynch's response was, Now, I'm actually against, I would coach young people getting in the business. Don't ever ask your director what the scene's about certainly not while they're doing it. Like, just let the director try to achieve whatever goal is in his head. You kind of upset, I think, the creative rhythm by saying, can you justify what we're doing? But he did ask, and he did get the response, which I thought was pretty classic Lynch. That's about what you'd expect him to do, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's difficult to talk about what something is actually about. Meaning is a big word than we think.
Well, I think you have those questions well before you start shooting. Like, what is this? What is X about? What is Y about? But also, I just don't think, I don't believe, like, directors. Well, I'm speaking to one. They're trying to achieve certain things artistically, and sometimes it's not, I think, a smart practice to interrupt them and hope for some sort of Phil Donahue explanation in the sequence. Like, just, what is this scene about? Like, what is this scene? It's such a pompous question. What do you think about it? I think it is.
Well, it's, when you're shooting a scene, my experience is often, an actor will often come back to that to try to refocus what we're doing. Because you can quickly go down a rabbit hole that is not helping the intention of the scene or meaning of the scene, so sometimes it's useful, but generally, wow, it's like you said, it's like pulling a hand grenade out in the middle of a small club, just, please don't do that.
An actor on a similar road of sort of like creative triumph, he may need to ask to get his thinking straight for what would be if scene A, scene B, scene C, scene D. A technician, I think once you start getting the below the line, you don't stop the process, especially on a tight schedule to ask interpretation of a scene. And these things, that's our business. These things happen. Sometimes these things shouldn't happen, but whatever. Now, you got final thoughts on this epic masterpiece, Blue Velvet, except for other than say, see it. I would say people should see it.
Well, I found it an incredibly emotional movie. Like it really moved
Yeah.
me. It was like a
Yeah.
cleansing experience for me. And I'm not. I won't shy away from saying that. But I think people should see if they want to watch a David Lynch movie, they should probably either start with Twin Peaks or Blue Velvet. And if they dig it, then they should dig in deeper because there's lots there.
I agree. I think you should see it, and I think you should go, you should explore everything David Lynch has to offer. I mean, he was a great conversationalist. There's hours of him just on YouTube of him pontificating or giving you a weather report, and he was very interesting to listen to. And there might be something poetic within the work that speaks to an audience member, and I think you should open yourself up to that possibility.
Hi there, everybody. Voice actor Roger Craig Smith here to talk to you about NMOSD. It can paralyze you, it can blind you, it can even kill you in a matter of minutes, but we are very close to a cure, and with that cure could come a cure for cancer. So please go to the Guthrie Jackson Foundation and donate today. Appreciate it.
I started listening to David Lynch's interviews, and he talked about a book that he had written about meditation. And because I was such a fan, I picked up the book and I read the book and I started to meditate. And it's been an important part of my life ever since. So there's all sorts of different influences that David Lynch has had on my life, and so I pray at his altar, as they say.
Yeah, I've had some talk about that. It's at the occasional charity event we do. We'll be visited by the monks from the Thai temple, and these guys. One of the things that I love about them, and I've tried to actually embrace, is the idea that you only live in the now. Whatever has happened, you can't do anything about. So there's no sense in agonizing over it. And whatever is going to happen hasn't happened yet. So it's just about now. You may not even get to that point. But they obviously explain it with a lot more eloquence. And it's like fascinating. And they have talked about meditation and the benefits of it. And it's fascinating stuff. And Lynch was a huge advocate for that. I think Lynch meditated in most of his meetings with Dino.
It's funny because he in his book, he talked a lot about how meditation was a little bit like fishing, where you would put your line down deep into your unconscious, turn off your chatter inside your head, and you would just wait. And then every once in a while, you'd be like, you catch something and you'd bring it up, and it would be like an idea or a form or an intention or a shape or a person, and this could act as inspiration for you. And he was right. It does, and meditation is good because it shuts off all the noise that's around. He uses the dog chasing a car as an example of your consciousness, like you're chasing a car, you're barking away. But so you gotta not chase, and the car is like an idea. You gotta not chase all the idea. You just let it turn it all off and let that let the thoughts go by, let the shapes go by. Don't chase cars, with your brain. And anyway, it was certainly something that he found very stimulating, because it seemed to be a great motivation for many, many, many movies, and they were all very influential. So
yeah, without a doubt. Well, all right. So should we bounce to movie number 2 now?
Let's go. May he rest in peace. Huh?
Yeah. May he rest in peace. Seriously. Look, whatever your opinion may be, he was a contributor to our art form and should be respected as such. And let's be honest, the dude was entertaining, if nothing else. The other thing, too, is including on David Lynch, he was friendly with everyone at Bob's Big Boy. He was not standoffish.
No, he was well loved by his fans, and even when he was on Hollywood Boulevard with a cow, he had a Polaroid camera, and you could get a picture of David Lynch if you paid him $10 toward his next movie. Take a picture with him and the cow, and you take the photo on your way. He was very, very accessible. He was always out.
leave it to David Lynch to have a Lynchian type stunt to finance a Lynch movie. It's like the kind of thing you could see John Waters doing, like,
Yeah, true.
like at like Hamburger Mary's or someplace. Like, if you have the conviction to make the movie, and you should have the conviction to go to extreme methods to get it financed. And there you go.
There you go, indeed.